pressure. I myself know what it's like to experience intense pressure because just last weekend I took my son and 4 of his friends to Laser Zone for his birthday party. And he and his friends, though very young, were very confident. They'd been before, whereas I felt tense and quite worried. And then I was ushered into this dark room, which was like a maze. There was this intense music. I was given the code name Zombie, which really didn't help my mood. And then all these very young, but very confident, and it turned out very accurate young children were running around shooting me. Anyway, I started to panic. I wanted to leave. And I just switched into this survival mode. And suddenly, the children were no longer children. My son was no longer my son. They were all quite simply the enemy. And so I went into this mode of trying to use my superior height, strength, speed, and life experience just to try and hold my own in that environment, and became perhaps slightly overly competitive. But I held my own, and it was fine. And then it was just after that, we were having pizza together at Laser Zone, and one of the guys working there came and brought out the scorecards with each person's position. And so he handed out to all the children their positions, which were from position 6 to position 2. And then he handed me my scorecard with a look of, I would say, a mixture of contempt and disdain, as he confirmed that, yes, I had indeed come first and beaten all the small children and had accumulated 3 or 4 times as many points as they had. I just felt so embarrassed. And my only comfort in that moment was the knowledge that Tara would have been even more competitive than I was if she had been in my position. We all experience pressure in our lives, and COVID has just added to the pressure in our relationships, in our work, with our finances. And how do we cope with this pressure? Well, I think naturally there are 3 responses. We often become more selfish. We become focused on ourselves, trying to control other people or attack other people or just trying to preserve our own position. We often become weaker. We can fall apart in the presence of pressure. And we often become more foolish. We lose perspective. We lose a sense of the bigger picture. And we start making stupid decisions. When you look at the life of Stephen and the short life of Stephen, you see in this passage his incredible grace under pressure. He is not selfish. Actually, he is full of love. He addresses the people who are around him, the Sanhedrin, as brothers and fathers. Remember, this is Stephen experiencing intense pressure. He's been seized. He's been accused of some of the worst crimes for a Jew to be accused of, trying to undermine the law and the temple. He's alone. He's outnumbered. He's young, the Sanhedrin would have been much older. He's Greek, they would have been Palestinian. And he's been accused of all these things which just aren't true. And yet he responds with this love, brothers and fathers. And then actually, even when they're stoning them, he prays for God's forgiveness for them. There's real love there. There's also real strength. He doesn't fold. He holds his own. He confronts them with having crucified the righteous one, Jesus himself. Some of us may be loving but find it hard to confront. Others of us may be very happy to confront but without love. But Stephen combines this love and strength, simultaneously confronting and forgiving the people who are attacking him. Love, strength, and wisdom. He doesn't lose perspective. In fact, he sees how what is happening fits into the bigger picture of the history of Israel. He tells the whole story of Israel, from Abraham up to Jesus, and shows how this moment fits into this larger whole. He's full of love, full of strength, full of wisdom. So much so that it says that those looking said he had the face of an angel. He's shining. He's radiating. Just like the intense pressure on carbon turns carbon into diamond, the intense pressure on Stephen causes him to shine like a diamond, shine like a star. He doesn't shine because he's popular or successful or because he's able to express himself. It doesn't come from self-expression. It comes from self-sacrifice. He is alone, rejected, apparently failing, and yet he is totally radiant, and in a way that has a profound impact. Saul, who will later become Paul, St. Paul, was watching, and this would be something that he would never forget. In fact, even then, 30 years later, he'd be writing a letter to the church in Philippi and say, "Do everything without complaining or grumbling, because if you do that, you will shine like stars in the universe." And this is what Stephen is able to do. He is full of love, strength, and wisdom. And it feels like we live at a time where these things are needed from us more than ever. But how do we do this? How did Stephen do this? Well, it says in the previous chapter that he was full of the Holy Spirit. And when you experience pressure, it's like you're being squeezed. And just like when a piece of fruit is squeezed, or a sponge or a flannel, you see what is within that thing. It's the same with us. When we experience pressure, when we are squeezed, you see what's within us. And Stephen was full of the Holy Spirit. He wasn't full of himself. He was full of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is the one who is perfect love, perfect strength, perfect wisdom. And when he was squeezed, those were the things that came out of him. But he also shines in this way because he is focused on Jesus. For him, Jesus is the fulfillment of his story and, in fact, of every story. He gives this extraordinary speech where he shows that actually the whole history of Israel and everything that people have been hoping for within the people of Israel was all fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So Abraham, he gives the example of Abraham, who was searching for a home and a family. It's the search to belong. And yet Jesus is the one in whom we truly belong. He is our true home. And when we belong to him, it means we can belong anywhere, and we can belong truly with other people. He gives the example then of Joseph, who was searching for position and success, dreams of leadership. But this too is fulfilled in Jesus. All our longings for a position in society are fulfilled in him, because in Jesus we become children of God. We are sons and daughters of the King. And there is no higher, no greater position than that. And that means that we do not have to try and take the greatest positions. We can always try and take the lowest positions. He gives the example then of Moses, who was searching for liberation for his people, the Israelites, when they were in slavery. And again, in so many ways, we are searching for freedom for ourselves, for the oppressed. But Jesus is the one who truly sets us free. He is the one who sets us free from sin and death. And if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. And then finally, he gives the example of David and Solomon, who were searching for a place where God might dwell. They were longing for the presence of God, for the divine, the spiritual. It's this spiritual search that every human being has in their heart, whether they realize it or not. And all of those longings for the spiritual, for the divine, are found in Jesus, who is God made flesh. In Jesus, we are connected to God, we are filled with God, we encounter God. And so Jesus is the fulfillment of everyone's story. Everything you are looking for, everything that you're longing for, is found in Jesus. Over Black History Month, one of the books I've been reading is Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. And in this book by Howard Thurman, who was born in Florida at the beginning of the 20th century, his grandmother was a slave and experienced the full evils of segregation in the United States at that time. Segregation and the denial of rights and the constant threat of violence. And he had this deep faith. He became a pastor. He was actually pastor of the first deliberately interracial church in the United States in San Francisco. He became pastor there. And he was also a theologian as well. And in 1935, he went over to Sri Lanka on this delegation. And he met with the head of the law college in Colombo. And they were having a cup of tea together. And the head of this law college turned to Howard Thurman and said, "How can you be a Christian? You are an intelligent man." But it was Christians who enslaved your ancestors. It was Christians who owned slaves, who supported the slave trade. And you live in a Christian country where there is still so much oppression, so much violence, so much injustice. How can you be a Christian? And Howard Thurman replied by talking about Jesus. He said Jesus was a Jew. And Jesus was a poor Jew. And Jesus was a poor Jew under a brutal and oppressive regime, part of a minority race under this majority oppressive regime. And Jesus is the fulfillment of the hopes of all who are poor, all who are dispossessed, all who are disinherited. And he wrote this book, Jesus and the Disinherited. It was such an influential book. Martin Luther King used to take it with him throughout his travels. And Jesus is the fulfillment of all our dreams, all our hopes, all our longings. Whatever we're searching for, he is the fulfillment. And there's this lovely detail right at the end of this passage that says that when Stephen was being stoned, he fell asleep. That's how it's described that he died, that he fell asleep, because it points to the fact that it's not the end. He would soon awake and he would be with Jesus. Stephen, so young with his life ahead of him, it looked like it was the end, but actually it was just the beginning. And Jesus is the one who is worth everything. For Stephen, it was worth dying for. It looked like it was the end of his life. It looked quite possibly like it might be the end of this movement, but actually it was just the beginning, because Jesus is worth it all.